Hi, welcome to my channel. It's Novel Idea. I know it's been a while since I've last uploaded a video, a little over a year, and I'm just not going to dwell on that. I'm just going to move right along and get to the books. I think I will start off with kind of a general reading update, and I'll start talking about the books that I read closer to the end of last year. I'm not going to talk very much about these books because, to be honest, I didn't enjoy either of them very much. And when I speak about books on this channel, I kind of like to reflect on the merits of the book, but with these ones in particular, I just wouldn't recommend them, and I didn't want to spend the time kind of doing a more in-depth review. So I'm just gonna kind of skim over the two of these books that I actually chose because they sort of topped the Goodreads most popular books. Yeah, I don't think that's my best bet for future reading recommendations. So the first one is The Silent Patient by Alex McAlides. This was a very popular thriller type book, psychological thriller type book. This I just really didn't gel with. Usually I find with thrillers, at least they're compelling and they're very bingey, but I didn't find this to be the case with this one. I just wasn't interested in basically anything going on in the story, and I didn't enjoy the writing, and I didn't enjoy the characters, and I just felt really detached and kind of was reading it in a very distant way where I was more or less just wanting to finish the book. Yeah, I don't really understand the hype with this one, but that it is what it is. So yeah, there's that. And then the other book is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this one, I enjoyed it a little bit more than the other book, but again, I just found it a little too fluffy, a little bit too tropey, and just kind of like fan fiction. Daisy Jones kind of seems like a Stevie Nicks sort of character, but in any case, I just thought it was like written from the perspective of someone who kind of obsessed over that lifestyle. I don't know, wanted to get kind of an insider advantage. I do think that this book had a little bit more depth to it because the characters, you know, they do struggle with some internal difficulties, and they kind of do get at that to some level. But overall, I just, you know, it just was a bit too fluffy and just a little bit too surface level, and the style of it is quite unique because it's written in a very like interview type style, and I just don't know if that lends itself for the most thorough character investigation, but it's done very well. So obviously, you know, it has its audience and people enjoyed the format of this book. I didn't hate it, but I did not love it. I thought it was perfectly okay. So the next novel, which I'm really excited to talk about, is a collection of short stories by Jhumpa Lahiri. This book is such a great collection because pretty much every single story pulls you in and you're almost instantly engaged in the characters and the plot, and the way that she weaves the story together is just really craftful. She's just a really great writer. So I genuinely enjoyed more or less every single story in this collection. They're not boring at all, and honestly, by the end of the story, you're kind of wishing that it would just continue and be perhaps its own full-length novel. So that's always a really good indicator of a short story collection. This deals with themes that you would expect from a novel, you know, that the immigrant experience and what it involves to uproot yourself from one country and establish yourself in another country. In particular, this novel focuses on the immigrant experience of Indians moving to America, a sense of cultural loss and grief over your identity and for everything that is familiar, and essentially the coexisting result of having to establish yourself in a new country and sort of rebuild your sense of self, one that sort of merges those two national identities with each other. The result is you just have this total respect and reverence for anyone who does have to go through that process. You get such an insight in this novel about what those individuals have to endure throughout, you know, moving and having to not necessarily assimilate, but definitely having to reconcile a set of cultural norms. I do think I'll revisit this book in the future. Again, I just really enjoy the individual stories and the characters that she develops. And I'm really looking forward to reading The Namesake, which I will probably do sooner rather than later. So if you have not read this, I definitely recommend it. It is a really, really strong collection. So there's that. All right, so to really switch things up quite a bit here, the next book I read is Convenience Store Woman, very small little bite-sized novel by Sayaka Murata. So Japanese book translated into English. I don't know by who, but surely someone. Yeah, so this is, what a weird book this one is. I liked it. I wouldn't say I loved it, but apparently it's a national bestseller, so there you go. Yeah, this is really a weird book. So this one is quite literal. It's called Convenience Store Woman, and really that's what the main character is. She works at a convenience store since she was 18. And essentially her deal is she's this young woman who always felt she was a burden to her family. She never really understood the appeal of a lot of normal things that people do, like pursue an education and, you know, aim for, you know, a well-meaning job and meaningful relationships. She just doesn't really have those inclinations naturally, and she finds herself kind of as an outsider, to put it lightly. She is trying to figure out how she can kind of realize some of those expectations, kind of get her family to not be so worried about her. So she finds that when she lands a job at a convenience store, you know, check, she kind of fulfills that expectation of herself and finds that she actually gets a lot of fulfillment out of being a convenience store worker, contributing member of society. And she really finds a lot of fulfillment in the monotony that the convenience store offers her, like the restocking of shelves and interacting with customers and, you know, having to ring up products and all that sort of stuff. It's a very reliable, repetitive job that she really kind of needs to give her that structure in her life. She's very happy and content with this position, but as she begins to get older, her family kind of wonders, all right, you know, what's next for you? Are you gonna find someone to marry? Are you gonna get a different job? Like, is this it? And I think she's a bit bewildered because she feels like, I thought this was it and this would be fine, but lo and behold, expectations, you know, tend to rise, and they're not stagnant. And so eventually there is another boy that, or another man that works at the convenience store with her and has sort of similar difficulties with society's expectations, albeit for kind of different motivations. And she strikes up a proposal saying that the two of them should live together and kind of pretend to be in a relationship so that people will get off their backs. That's kind of the, you know, Cole's notes of this book, but I really think that the reading experience and the quirkiness that exists in this novel is kind of where you're gonna see the more entertaining part. There are a lot of indications that our main character here is quite sociopathic. There are a few scenes, one in particular, where she's sitting with her sister and her nephew, and the baby is crying, and she thinks to herself that, you know, it'd just be a matter of taking this knife on the table to make him quiet. You know, there are scenes like that indicate there's a lot more going on psychologically with this character. The one thing is that I felt as though those moments were never really followed up on. They kind of happen and then are left, you know, to the reader to interpret. But you do get a pretty good sense that this narrator is maybe not the most feeling or empathic person, and perhaps that's why she doesn't understand a lot of these expectations on her. So all in all, I think, you know, this book is different. It's quirky and it's weird and it's entertaining, but I think I would have liked to see a bit more of, you know, an explanation on some of those areas of her psyche that we got some hints towards, but it never really was fleshed out. And additionally, yeah, I think it kind of does just kind of remain a bit surface level in that sense, but I think it's also the intention of Sayaka Murata to leave that up to the reader to recognize, you know, some people just don't relate to cultural and societal expectations, and they really have to kind of stretch their imagination and figure out what it is and why it is that these things matter, and they're kind of just faking it. And I think that that's probably true for some people. So I enjoyed the overall kind of theme and message of the book. I didn't love it, but it's an enjoyable enough of a read. Yeah, that's Convenience Store Woman. So there's that. The next book I read is the highly anticipated follow-up book to Homegoing, and it's Ya Jassi's Transcendent Kingdom. Transcendent Kingdom follows the American Ghanaian narrator named Gifty, who is studying neuroscience at Stanford University. And in particular, her interest is how the brain's reward and risk system works. And so she conducts this experiment on mice where she has a simulation that essentially feeds them a treat, but intermittently they will experience a shock. So her interest is in those mice that continue to put themselves at risk for that shock in case they might receive the potential reward. As the reader, because we know a little bit more about Gifty's upbringing and her personal life, it's very obvious why she chose this as her academic interest and pursuit. Her brother dealt with an ongoing battle of addiction, and we also know that at a young age their father left them to return back to Ghana. There's also a very present religious streak throughout the novel, and we sort of see how in Gifty's home at a young age, her mother really relied on her faith to be a source of comfort and kind of a coping mechanism for her. They had to endure a lot of poverty and racism, and again, with her brother's addiction, her mother really depended on her faith to kind of be a source of comfort for her. Her mother kind of falls to these bouts of depression where Gifty ends up taking her mother in and taking care of her while she's still in school. So there's a lot of themes running through this novel: the experience of being Black in America, poverty, addiction, and overcoming a lot of stereotypes, the abandonment of parental figures. Definitely a lot that she takes on in terms of mapping out the novel and the themes that she grapples with and discusses. It's a heavy book. I always have a hard time saying when I don't especially connect with a novel that, you know, really does take on a lot of difficult and complicated themes. But I think just because of how much I enjoyed Homegoing, this one wasn't quite as enjoyable for me. I know it's a totally different book. Like, Homegoing is really vast, and it kind of tracks this like sweeping generational narrative, whereas this is a lot more contemporary and really focuses more in depth on Gifty and her personal struggles and, you know, her upbringing and her current life. And so it's really not doing the same thing as Homegoing did. I didn't really feel so invested in the characters. The way that these themes were being dealt with wasn't in a way that I hadn't read before, and it wasn't in a way that really brought me to a place where I would feel the emotional impact of the characters. So I didn't overall dislike it, because I do think it's a very readable book. Ya Jassi is a really good writer. She really can pull you in, sort of sustain the reader's interest, but I just had very high expectations. So yeah, that's Transcendent Kingdom. So the last book I want to talk about is one I'm very excited to mention. It's Luster by Raven Leilani. I think from just strictly from just enjoying it, it was just so up my alley and such an enjoyable reading experience. I'd put this up there with like Milkman by Anna Burns, or what is it? Yeah, Anna Burns, sorry. Milkman by Anna Burns and The Idiot by Elif Batuman. By that I mean just enjoying the actual story and the writing, not necessarily commenting on like objective qualities, but from a subjective, experiential point of view, like this just knocked it out of the park for me. It's very difficult to describe. It's like a really messy sort of stream of consciousness type book, and it's less to do with plot and more to do with character. And it's from that point of view, it's just so great. Raven Leilani is hilarious. Let me get that out of the way first. She's got a first-rate sense of humor. The writing is really insightful, really pointed, and it's just got this dark humor to it that I really appreciated. It's so relatable. So the story and plot of this, I would say, is second to just the internal dialogue that the narrator is constantly, indulging in. But the plot is also interesting, and it follows a young Black woman who lives in New York City and kind of has her priorities all out of whack. So she works at a publishing firm and, is kind of known for being promiscuous around the office, and eventually she gets dismissed for that being her reputation, and there being some complaints about her. It is true that she is much more involved and concerned about her personal life, in particular her romantic life, than she is about her career or really anything else. When we first are kind of introduced to the character, she's just beginning to engage with a man who is older, and he's married and has, an established career and all that stuff. Twist in the book is that relationship ends up being secondary to the relationship that Edie, who is the narrator, ends up developing with that man's wife. So eventually, I don't want to spoil too much, but the relationship that Edie ends up developing with that man's wife becomes such a strange, interesting relationship. And they both, really get to know each other just kind of by observing each other. And in particular, Edie's observations towards Rebecca and how she kind of carries herself and is so competent about everything that she does, and really prides herself on this competence. Her appearance and just other superficial things are not as relevant to her. So we're kind of dealing with two characters that are really opposites in a lot of ways. Edie, who is this young woman who has no financial security, hasn't established her career in any way, but she's this artist, a talented, young, smart woman who is kind of really lost about her future and who she is and the things that she wants to do. So she, I think, instead relies on her body and on these sexual fantasies and trysts that she engages in. Just one of those books that really sticks with you, is just so thoughtfully written. And I really just enjoyed the writing style and the dialogue and her crafting of characters, not just Edie, but Rebecca and Rebecca's daughter, and also Eric, who is the man that she's having an affair with, who ends up probably being the least relevant character, and what it means to be a Black woman and having to deal with a lot of judgment. Also, self-judgment is definitely present. Those are things that interest you. I definitely recommend this book. I'm so glad that I actually read this. I do think it'll be one of my favorite books of the year, and it really kind of, reinvigorated my reading. Yeah, it's books like this that kind of just get you in a space where you want to just read more like it. So Luster by Raven Leilani, definitely recommend this one. Those are the books that I have read most recently. Apologies again for the hiatus. I intend to be uploading more regularly now. If you've made it this far into the video, I really appreciate it. Please, if you'd like, share a comment with me down below, and I will catch you guys in the next one.